Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of the Age Gap Love Story. We are Carrie and Alan, a married couple with a 32-and-a-half-year age difference, and we started this podcast and YouTube channel to offer information, support, and community to help make your age gap relationship successful. So far in the last 3 episodes, we discussed a lot of our personal experiences. And today we wanted to talk about things to consider when you are starting an age gap relationship, or maybe some things that you need to consider if you're already an age gap couple but you haven't thought of. But since we've been together for so long, we thought it would be helpful to share some of these things with you. And so the topic of today's episode is things to consider when starting an age gap relationship. And we're really going to talk about dating, how to pick a partner, things that you should consider when you're thinking about getting serious with your partner, and some really specific issues when we're talking about a large age difference. And we also want to say that this episode is really geared for people who've kind of made the decision already that you are ready for a relationship and you're not just casually dating or looking for like a short-term situation, but you're really looking for a long-term partner. And just to remind you, we aren't therapists or relationship experts. We're using our experience and our research as the basis of this episode. And one other thing, sorry honey, I'm taking all the airtime, but I wanted to tell you that the Age Gap Love Story website is now live, and so I would love for you to check it out. It's just agegaplovestory.com, and this is going to be the hub of where we keep all the information, all the podcast episodes, the show notes, articles, and other extra material about age gap relationships. And so I hope that you will check it out. And there is an email sign up form there, so you can sign up for our email newsletter, and I will include all the links in the YouTube description or the podcast show notes, so please check it out. And now I'm going to hand the mic over. As you can see, if you're watching, we're still sharing a mic, and I did order a second mic and I just have to set it up, so I haven't gotten to that part yet. So right now we're still sharing the mic, so we have to kind of take turns, but Alan is going to jump into the first tips of the episode, and we're going to share some of our personal experiences as well.
First things first, I'm not going to give the mic back to you. Okay, general tips for picking a partner, and forgive me for looking down and referring to our notes, but I just want to make sure that we don't overlook items that we thought of earlier before we went to the recording part of our efforts. I think it's important that you talk to the person and get to know them better as you're making up your mind to determine if they have the same interests. If there's a click at the beginning, likely this is the case, but you need to kind of probe deeper. There are just a number of issues, and things do change over time. One particularly important issue with respect to, is this person looking for a relationship or just sort of like a dating experience? And it's really important to know that as you move forward, that people do change over time. So you have to kind of be aware of that, and you really want to get to the root or the heart of what this person, what their personality and their characteristics are really like. One thing to be cautious of is a rebound relationship where somebody is either coming out of a divorce or has just separated, or if they've just ended a relationship and they're just looking for a place to land for some warmth and comfort. That really is a difficult situation to assess, but if it is the case, I mean, it doesn't mean that it won't work. You just have to be aware of it.
Yes, I wanted to say one thing, because when Alan and I were talking about this episode yesterday, he said to me, well, you know, when you're thinking about becoming involved with someone, you want to make sure they're really serious and they want to settle down and blah, blah, blah. And I reminded him that when he and I first started dating, he made it clear that he wanted to be in a relationship, but he also expressed some hesitation about getting married again or having a home again. And I mean, it didn't turn me off because I was really young at that time, and that was kind of, I wasn't even thinking about buying a home or getting married. But it was comforting to me to know that he wasn't just like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm going to be moving, or I just don't want to settle down. It wasn't anything like that. But on the other hand, he wasn't necessarily sure about what his future would hold. And I mean, really, nobody is. But I guess the idea is that if somebody is really clear that they're not looking for something serious, then, I mean, you have to listen to that. And, you know, it's not your job to try to change them or convince them, but you should find somebody who's looking for the same thing that you're looking for.
And personality traits that I'm sure you've thought of, but just to sort of outline a few, are issues such as kindness, reliability, emotional stability, honesty. And these are things that you have to explore. And I would not be shy once you get to know the other person to ask questions and be observant. There are issues such as, does this person bring debts with them? Do they have an issue with children from a previous marriage? Do they have an ex relationship, whether it's a separated wife or an ex-wife that presents a problem? As an example, years ago I had a professional business friend who had separated and then divorced his wife. And as you know, it's a very emotionally traumatizing event. Perhaps sometimes one for more one of the partners than both. But this fellow's wife was just really an emotional wreck. And long after they separated, she found out where he was living, which was an apartment. And he was just in the phase of beginning to date other women and establish a new relationship or go out into that world. And once his ex-wife found out where he lived, she began to chain herself to the wrought iron railing on the walkway to where his apartment was located. And it created a lot of problems actually for both of them and for their children. So issues like this you have to be aware of.
Right, and I wanted to cite an article that I found in Psychology Today because we're talking about this issue of character and personality. And I think personality compatibility can be measured by other things, and you can just use your instincts on that too. But as far as character, this article that I found in Psychology Today, which I will link to in the show notes as well, it did say that the most important characteristics you should look for in a long-term relationship are kindness, reliability, and emotional stability. And Alan mentioned those, but I just wanted to kind of repeat that since I thought it was really kind of profound to be able to distill it down to 3 characteristics like that. And I was thinking about how Alan demonstrated those things when we first started dating. For instance, he had flowers for me, and we would send each other little cards back and forth since we lived in different cities. I mean, these are kind of things that you do in a courtship, but I think they do demonstrate kindness as well. But I also remember he cared for me, and remember I had an issue with my car, and he helped me financially fix it. Reliability, he was always on time, and we would, if we set a date to call each other or to get together, we were both on time, and that's an example of reliability. And then emotional stability. I mean, if you think about it, when you're dating somebody, this is the courtship, and this is the time when you are making an evaluation from somebody. So if somebody shows a burst of anger or something that may show that they're not emotionally mature, that should be a red flag. And of course, nobody's perfect. We're not saying that. But again, this is the time when you're putting your best foot forward. And if somebody's already showing signs that make you uncomfortable, then you need to think about that. And I just would say, overall, Alan and I did not play games with each other, like mentally. I'm sure you know what I mean, like, oh, I'll call you, and then they didn't call, that kind of thing. I would not put up with that. I mean, that was so not something I was looking for. I think because of my issues with my parents in the past and not having emotional stability with them and being able to trust them. For my partner, I wanted somebody emotionally stable. Maybe I didn't know how to express that, but just the fact that Alan was reliable and followed up on what he said, and he didn't play games like mental games. I never felt like scared or uncertain or fearful, or I don't know, any of those things that to me would just, I would want to run the other direction, quite frankly. I mean, and they can be, the sad part, I guess, is that some of those things can be like attractive, like playing hard to get. But for me, and I think what this article in Psychology Today is pointing out, is that for a long-term, stable relationship, those types of playing games, maybe they're not an indicator of what you might actually be looking for.
Also, on the topic of one of the points that Carrie mentioned, which was being on time, sometimes our deeper issues. I recall that before I met Carrie, when I did begin dating sometime after I separated from my ex-wife, one of the ladies that I dated was 30 minutes late to a dinner date that we had, and it was at a restaurant where I had often taken business clients and gone for lunch, so they knew me. And actually, being 30 minutes late on a Saturday night when they were extremely busy and it was hard to get a reservation was embarrassing. And I remember I told a little white lie when I went up to the hostess and said, "I'm sorry, but the lady I'm meeting, her cat just had kittens, and so she's going to be a little late." In any case, when this lady showed up and I asked her about why she was late, she didn't make any excuses. She said, as after a couple of glasses of wine, that actually her mother used to be very demanding about her being on time for everything. And as a way to rebel against her mother, she just started becoming late. And as the years went by, it became more pronounced in her everyday behavior. So to me, that was sort of a clue that there might be other issues that I had needed to be cautious about. And again, I hate to point out faults you should look for, but they'll come back and haunt you if you're not aware of them. Particularly issues such as addictions, whether it's to alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex, are possibly big problems. And they're very difficult to overcome. Some of the issues that can actually be quite harmful or damaging are anger management issues, such as abuse. And these things often don't surface in a big way until somebody really gets to a point where they feel they have a degree of control over you. So just be alert to the fact if somebody has a big temper when you spend time with them, that's definitely a red flag.
Right. So I think so far we've talked about a few things to kind of look out for relationships in general. So just to review, the first one was to make sure that a person is looking for the same thing as you are. The second would be getting to know their character and personality. And the third one would be kind of to be on red alert for traits that don't work for you. As Alan mentioned, things like anger management issues, addictions, things like that. And then I would say the fourth thing to consider, it would be compatibility, which is something like with your hobbies and your vacation preferences. I mean, if you're dating somebody and they're like, oh yeah, I want to spend 3 months every year in Romania, where my family is from, that might be amazing for some person, but for some people, but for somebody else, they may have no interest in that kind of travel, just as a random example. And maybe even if somebody is a homebody or somebody wants to be out all the time, that can be like an introvert, extrovert type of thing. So those are kind of 4 basic issues to consider with any type of relationship, even a friendship, if you're getting to know somebody as a friend. But then we have even going deeper and more specifically with age gap relationships, we thought of several other considerations to take into account. And I think one of them should be this kind of a big deal, and it's a little touchy, but health issues. I know a lot of you may be wondering about if you have an older person that you're dating, somebody older than you. I think it's natural to wonder, well, what's it going to be like 10 years from now? And it's interesting because Alan had, I think I've mentioned this in other episodes, but it's been a bit ironic that as we've been together, I have been the one to have more health issues. But a lot of those stem from my childhood or genetics and autoimmune conditions. And we want to just mention that we're going to have a whole episode about health and nutrition and their tips and things that we do ourselves to stay healthy. We thought it might be helpful. I do have a master's degree in public health, so it is one of my areas of expertise, and my true passion is topics of health and wellness and nutrition. But I mean, even if somebody is older and they have maybe some issues, for Alan, for instance, Alan smoked for a long time when he was young. It was kind of trendy when, what was that, in the 50s? When did you start? In the 60s, maybe? He smoked a long time.
Because my father had a business where, among other things, we sold cigarettes, I had easy access to them, and I began smoking at 15 and quit at 34. And the only way I was able to quit, I was in an auto accident and had to go in and have an operation performed on my nose and breathing area, my sinuses. And being in the hospital during that time, I was unable to smoke, and that was the break I needed to quit. So I did smoke for a long time, and as a result, it has had an impact, although minor, but still an impact on my lungs. In any case, there are issues that an older person will bring with respect to health, and you need to examine, do they have a regimen of good nutrition? Do they get plenty of sleep? Do they exercise? Do they eat properly? And if not, in fact, whether you're the younger or the older person, these are both issues to help you age well. And it's not so much how long you live, not the quantity of life, but the quality of life is a big factor. And you are the captain of your own ship in that respect.
Yes, and Alan and I were both pretty, I don't know how would we describe it. We've really gone on a health journey together. So when I met Alan, I really knew nothing about nutrition. And we'll talk about this in our episode on health. But we've really gone on a journey together. And so maybe even just the willingness to make changes is kind of something that you can consider. For instance, if you're looking to get healthier and your dating partner or your relationship partner also wants to get healthier, then it's something you can do together. And I think that's been one of the reasons Alan and I have been successful in our journey, because we've done it together. For instance, we just finished a little jazzercise home workout, which we did together. And I should film a little bit of that sometime, because Alan has a very lovely freestyle jazzercise form. But yes, I mean, if you're dating somebody and they are a workaholic, they smoke, they drink, I think that can be a red flag as well.
One of the issues we touched on earlier is, for lack of a better description, and forgive me for saying this, but is baggage that either or both people bring to a new relationship. And that can include, and I believe I touched on this earlier, relationships with an ex, whether it's a spouse or just a relationship with someone else in the past. It can involve spousal support, child support, debts. A lot of people carry credit card debt, or maybe it's a mortgage on a house that the ex-spouse now has. There are emotional issues, baggage that people bring from either their family or whatever the case may be. Supporting elderly parents is both an emotional and a financial strain on a relationship. And most relationships, once they get going, one of the more serious issues that seems to be a complicating and destroying factor is finance. So you need to be sensitive to that. And we'll talk about this more in our segment dealing specifically with finance, but things such as prenuptial agreements, is health insurance in place? Uh, are there assets to support the non-earning partner if there is one? So these are things you need to think about. I know it's a lot to think about, and the thing to do is after the initial click, when you really get interested in somebody, is maybe to sit down and make up a list. And in the work that we present on our website, or perhaps in another format, we might present you with a checklist that might make it a little easier for you. And as Carrie referenced earlier, she's quite knowledgeable in the quality of life and health issues, and her website, Clean Eating Kitchen, is a good reference to keep you healthy.
Thank you. And I also wanted to say that I don't think we're trying to say that when you're thinking about a relationship that the other person has to be perfect or you have to be perfect. I mean, certainly when Alan and I met, he was going through his divorce settlement. He was also in the process of selling his business. And so he lived in an apartment. He had a lot of uncertainty about his future work opportunities. You know, I was young, I did have a job, I had an apartment, but I had college debt. I wasn't making a ton of money. I had a little bit of credit card debt. But I think the idea is that we had a plan. I mean, individually, Alan had a plan to move forward. At least he, wanted to work. He wanted to continue, of course, taking care of himself and his responsibilities, and the same as me. So I think maybe that's a difference. So even if you do have, or the other person has debts, there's a difference between having debts and working to repay them versus not having any kind of a plan and wishing that they're going to go away. That's a big difference. I know somebody who, this is kind of a little bit off subject, but she ended up getting involved with a con man, and he told all kind of lies, and it seemed obvious to her friends and family that this guy was telling lies, but she was really taken in by him, and a lot of the lies were about finances. And so I guess that's a little bit of a different subject, but people do lie about their finances, so I'm not sure how to deal with that. Do you have thoughts about that? How you would handle asking somebody? I mean, you can't really ask for proof. You don't want to ask somebody for their background check, or I don't know, maybe you do.
I think there are clues. In this particular case that Carrie referenced, this individual had a number of excuses for inaction. For example, going out to dinner to buy something at a store where it would be his responsibility rather than the lady he was dating. He would claim that his credit card was on hold or frozen because he had assets coming in from a European bank and there was a delay on the currency conversion. And I mean, it all sounded plausible, but it just was consistent. And he didn't have a car because his car was a very expensive one being shipped over from Europe, and it was tied up in processing with customs, and everything, again, had a very logical explanation, but he never paid. He continued to live off of this other lady. This lady was in the relationship, and it was just one thing after the other. But if you're really smitten by somebody, a lot of times you don't see this. There's an old biblical expression, there are none so blind as those who will not see. And it's more common than you'd think. Unfortunately, as Mark Twain said, common sense is not so common. But do be alert to issues like this, and because people can hide things very cleverly. and it's hard to determine them. And if you really get serious, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask somebody if you can run a background check on them or a credit review or ask to see a credit report.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds a little awkward, but maybe if you were getting really serious, I mean, if you were considering marriage to somebody, you also have to think about that if they have serious debts and you get married, you could become responsible for those debts. And so maybe you can use the excuse that your attorney insists that that he or she sees the credit report just for your own well-being, make your attorney the bad guy. But anyways, those are just a few ideas. And so I would say we have 2 more points that are specific to when we're thinking about an age gap relationship. And the 2 points left, I think, would be thinking about the future. I mean, in a way, I think with our relationship, we've found a balance between living in the moment and being responsible about planning as much as we can within reason for the future. So we've done things like purchased a long-term care insurance for both of us. Early on when Alan and I were dating, I told him about how my grandfather had had a stroke. He was not even that old. He was maybe in his mid 50s, and he was completely disabled and had to be cared for 24 hours a day for the rest of his life, which ended up being about 15 years maybe. And if he had not had long-term care insurance, it would have completely bankrupted my grandmother. So, I mean, he ended up having to be in a home, and that's very expensive. So, I mean, that is not a fun topic to think about, but it is something to think about. I think if you have a dream about owning a home and the other person doesn't want that responsibility, that's something to talk about. Other things like pets, how you want to spend your time. We kind of talked about this before, but these are all issues to discuss. And then we have one more point that we had on this topic.
And what would that point be?
The life stage.
Oh, life stage differences. Because I am essentially retired and Carrie is very busy with a number of projects dealing with her blog and another podcast and various things, she's actually quite busy. So while she's busy, I'm not busy. However, I have found things to occupy me, and it's worked out great. And I guess the point is that if the individual who's older is in a circumstance where they're not working, and the younger person is and wants to continue working, depending upon your financial independence and those circumstances, it might be difficult because the not working person might say, hey, spend more time with me. And the working person say, hey, don't bug me. I'm busy. I've got my career. So that could be quite a mismatch that could create a problem, and you need to address it early on.
Yes, as Alan was a very hard worker his whole life. I mean, he still is. And when he got near retirement age, I mean, he's actually been working past retirement age, but somebody made a joke. They said retirement is half as much money and twice as much husband. And I have to say that we were concerned when Alan really stopped working even part-time. But it's worked out okay. I think it's helped that I work from home, and so it's not like he gets lonely. And actually, it's maybe nicer for me because I do work from home. I don't get lonely either. We have lunch together. We have, of course, breakfast together, and usually we'll exercise in the morning. We take a nice walk in the afternoon. So it's worked out really well. But when I was seeing a therapist, I think she was a marriage and family therapist early on in our relationship, mostly for help in dealing with my mom. But we also she brought up some potential issues for having a relationship with such a large age difference. And she was the one who kind of put this idea in my head about life stage differences. And that could also apply to like a younger person is in a child rearing phase and an older person is, way beyond wanting to raise children. It really just depends on each person and how you work together. I don't know that it has to be it certainly doesn't have to be a deal breaker because we've worked through it. It's just maybe there's some compromises that have to happen.
Just one additional thought that occurred to me after one of our previous podcasts. I think we talked about the difficulty in telling family and friends about an age gap relationship. And between Carrie and I, we have a lot of experiences that we've heard from other people that we've known over the years. And one that occurred to me was a professional acquaintance of mine who was very accomplished, an attorney, and had, I'm not sure if it was a messy divorce. Most of them are somewhat messy. But after a couple of years, he evidently met a young lady who was Asian. And he wanted to have lunch with me. I didn't know why at the time because he lived on the East Coast and he was on the West Coast and made a special effort to travel to the area where I live for our lunch. And what he wanted to discuss was, how did my children react? And I know we discussed this in a previous episode, but he was really concerned about it. And so I told him our experience and how he dealt with my adult children, and he had 2 children of college age. And I remember speaking with him about, maybe 3 or 4 months later, he decided to proceed with his age gap relationship. He actually decided to marry the lady. But when he was becoming serious, evidently engaged in telling his children, they became so angry that one of his children, who was, I believe, a junior in college, would not speak to him. And then we spoke again, I believe several months later, and I asked him how things were going and how his children were dealing with his now marriage. And he said that actually they had come around and things were working out okay, but I guess it was a difficult situation. So I just thought I would relate that things can often work themselves out, although it's bumpy at first.
Okay, so in that case, you were saying there was also an interracial relationship as well as an age gap relationship. Right, so I think I wanted to just say, we're kind of wrapping up this episode, but I wanted to say that for episode 5, what did we decide that we were going to talk about? We decided that
Dating?
No, we're talking about dating now. I think we decided that we are going to talk about how to tell your friends and family.
Oh.
Yes. So I wanted to give you that little preview, and that might be a juicy episode. We could maybe go into some more of our horror stories about what happened to us. But again, it seems like it's all worked out. I know I kind of mentioned briefly in the past how it was really hard to tell especially my mother, and it did not go well. But I would say that some of these things just take time, but we'll get into that in episode 5.
I just want to add that, hello, I forgot what I wanted to add. I'm having a senior moment, forgive me.
About the next episode?
About dating? No.
Okay.
Well, whatever. So, I know what I wanted to ask you. Is it, hello, who are you? What I wanted to ask, and I've done this, I think at the end of every episode, is please send us your questions, your comments. If you have had experiences on the topics that we either have discussed or are going to discuss, or ones that we haven't mentioned, please let us know. We'd love to address them or incorporate them. And thank you.
And I just wanted to leave you one last point that I got from Psychology Today, because I thought it was really interesting on this point of relationships. And in the article, which I will link to below, but the expert in this article said that the purpose of a romantic union is to provide support and bring out the best in each other, so that each individual has the nourishment and strength to go out in the world and reach the life goals that each individual has. And I loved that so much. But then he went on to say Meanwhile, in bad relationships, the relationships actually drain both partners and hold them back from what they could otherwise be doing to advance themselves and keep evolving as individuals. And so I thought that was kind of just a really great summary of, um, if you're in this point about you're dating somebody or thinking about dating somebody, to kind of hold that thought. And then I wanted to maybe just address one question that I would think might come up in this situation, and it might have to do with attraction. And I would imagine it might be more from from the younger partner about the older partner. And I guess in this article, somebody asked this psychologist, like, well, how do you evaluate like chemistry and like the spark and the attraction? Like, in other words, how important should that be? And I thought it was so interesting that this psychologist said pretty much like it's not that big of a deal. And he said, instead, be on the lookout for someone who has the same characteristics you look for in friends. In other words, you should feel the same intensity of spark with a new friend that you feel with a new romantic interest. So it's not just about a physical attraction, but it's about, do you really want to get to know this person? Do you want to be friends? I mean, if you're going to be dating somebody, they're going to be your friend. They should be your friend. And if you're going to marry somebody, ideally they should be your best friend or one of them. So I thought I would just share that with you. And Alan is poking me as one more thing to say.
On that topic, years ago I used to spend a lot of time in Carmel, California, and there was a restaurant called, may still be there, the Wagon Wheel, like a little coffee shop run by a lovely lady who's no longer with us, Katie. And there used to be a little sign in there among all the paraphernalia, all the Western stuff, like wagon wheels and whatever, and cowboy stuff. In any case, there was a little sign up, and it said, "Kissin' don't last, cookin' do." And you can interpret that any way you want, but I think that goes to the point that Carrie made. The kissing is important, but there's so many other issues if you want to make it last.
So I think that wraps up episode 4. Thank you everybody for listening, and we will look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye.